The hottest jock duo punched each other over one kiss from the nerd? The pre-class energy buzzed around me as I tried focusing on my physics textbook, but the commotion in the back corner kept drawing my attention. There they were, Westlake High's golden duo, Keith Sun and Phil Matthews, commanding the room effortlessly. Keith, with his perfectly styled dark hair and casual confidence, had Phil pinned against the wall, their faces inches apart. "You're saying you could score more points than me blindfolded?" Keith challenged, his voice carrying across the room. "That's rich, coming from someone who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn last season against Jefferson." Phil's broad shoulders tensed as he shoved Keith back. "That was one game, and I was sick. Everyone knows it. Besides, Coach put me in for the final quarter, and I still outscored you." "In your dreams, Matthews." Keith lunged forward, locking Phil in what looked like a headlock. My glasses slipped down my nose as I clutched my textbook tighter. Why wasn't anyone stopping them? I've only been at Westlake for 3 months, keeping to myself mostly. My days filled with AP classes and chess club meetings, but even I know who Keith and Phil are. Their faces are everywhere. The school newspaper, trophy case, even the banners in the gym. Before I could think better of it, I crossed the room, heart pounding. "Stop it! Please?" My voice cracked embarrassingly as I thrust my arms between them, my sweater vest twisting awkwardly. The classroom fell completely silent. Keith froze mid-grapple, his arms still around Phil's neck. Both stared at me with identical expressions of amusement. "What are you doing?" Keith asked, genuinely confused. Every eye fixed on me. My throat went dry. I'm stopping you from fighting. The principal has a zero-tolerance policy for..." The laughter started with Phil, a deep, rumbling chuckle that quickly spread. Keith released his friend, doubling over. Soon the entire classroom erupted, and I stood there, shrinking with each passing second. "Fighting?" Phil wiped tears from his eyes. "Dude, we've been best friends since we were 5. Heat rushed to my face. "But he had you against the wall." "We do this every day," Keith explained between chuckles. "It's how we warm up for practice." "Oh." I adjusted my glasses, wishing I could disappear. I'm sorry for interrupting. Something shifted in Phil's expression as his laughter faded. He studied me with unexpected interest. "Hey, no harm done. I'm Phil, by the way." "I know who you are," I mumbled, then hastily added, "Everyone does." Keith stepped forward, extending his hand. "And I'm Keith. Don't think we've officially met, though I've seen you in advanced physics." His handshake was surprisingly gentle. "Jacob Chen," I managed. "The guy who broke the curve on Stevenson's midterm." Phil nodded appreciatively. I blinked in surprise. Phil Matthews knew about my test scores? It wasn't that impressive. "It was to me," Phil said, with a smile that caused an unfamiliar flutter in my chest. After class, my chemistry partner Mark stopped me. "Quite the performance," he said. Nobody interrupts those two. "I thought they were fighting." "They've been inseparable forever. That's just how they communicate." "Movie night Friday?" he continued. "Mom's nachos and Lord of the Rings?" Our weekly tradition. One constant in my life at Westlake. Wouldn't miss it. "Good," Mark grinned. "Because I need someone to explain the elvish parts to me. You nerd." I smiled, grateful for his friendship. The one person who seemed to like me for exactly who I was. Later that afternoon, the final bell freed me from the prison of whispers about my morning humiliation. Seeking quiet, I retreated to the empty gymnasium's bleachers, chemistry textbook forgotten on my lap as I savored the peaceful echoes. The double doors swung open with a bang. Laughter and the rhythmic bounce of a basketball announced Keith and Phil's arrival. "Coach is going to make us run suicides for a week if we don't nail this play," Phil said, spinning the ball effortlessly. They hadn't noticed me yet. I quietly closed my textbook, hoping to slip away undetected. "We've got this," Keith replied, shrugging off his jacket. Remember sophomore year when we... He stopped mid-sentence as his eyes locked with mine. Jacob? I was just leaving, I stammered, clutching my textbook like a shield. Phil smiled. You don't have to go. We're just practicing. I don't want to disturb you, I said, continuing my descent. You might be our good luck charm after this morning's entertainment, Keith called out. Heads up, Phil shouted. I turned at the worst possible moment. Everything happened in slow motion. The ball hurtling toward my face, Keith lunging forward, my feet dangling. Watch out! Keith collided with me. We went down in a tangle of limbs. I landed flat on my back, with Keith sprawled half on top of me, his face inches from mine. Are you okay? He asked, his breath warm against my cheek. I couldn't answer. His dark eyes were so close I could see flecks of amber in them. Phil cleared his throat. You two need a minute alone? His tone was light, but his expression seemed almost territorial. Keith retrieved my glasses, sliding them gently onto my face. As he moved, I became acutely aware of every point where our bodies connected. Thanks, I whispered. Keith scrambled to his feet and helped me up. When our palms met, I felt a jolt that had nothing to do with static electricity. As I hurried toward the exit, I pressed my back against the cool metal door, heart racing. What was happening? Guys like Keith's son didn't look at guys like me that way. Did they? After a day, Friday night found me sprawled on Mark's living room floor, surrounded by nacho debris as the movie credits rolled. I still don't understand why they didn't just fly the Eagles to Mordor, Mark said, tossing a pillow my way. I caught it surprisingly well. We've been over this. The Eagles are... Mark finished the sentence while mimicking me. I just like watching you get passionate about it. Something in his tone made me look up. Mark was watching me with a soft expression I couldn't interpret. What? I asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing, you've just got... He leaned forward, brushing a nacho crumb from my cheek, his fingers lingering. There. An odd tension filled the room before Mark abruptly stood. More soda? Sure, I replied, wondering why my cheek still tingled. As he left, I noticed a photo on the side table, us at the science fair. I was looking at the camera, but Mark was looking at me with that same expression. Did something happen with the basketball twins? He called. You seemed distracted. Just a weird day, I replied evasively. Mark returned, studying me. You can tell me anything. That's what best friends are for. Best friends? I ignored the strange pang in my chest at those words. After a few days, 3 days after the basketball court incident, I'd successfully avoided Keith and Phil by taking alternate routes and hiding during lunch. My strategy worked perfectly, until Friday afternoon in the library. I stayed late in the deserted reference section, working on my chemistry project. Pauling's Nature of the Chemical Bond sat just out of reach on the top shelf. My fingertips barely grazed the spine. Need some help there? I froze at Phil's voice, turning to face his easy smile. I'm fine, I lied, the book still unreachable. Phil raised an eyebrow. Sure you are. Instead of simply grabbing the book, he moved directly behind me, his chest pressing against my back as he reached up. His warmth enveloped me, his breath stirring my hair. This one? He asked, voice low near my ear. I nodded, acutely aware of how perfectly I fit against him, his hand resting lightly on my waist. Pauling, huh? Heavy reading for a Friday night, he said, finally handing me the book, his fingers deliberately brushing mine. Chemistry project, I managed. I know a thing or two about chemistry, Phil replied meaningfully, leaning closer, my back against the bookshelf. You've been avoiding me. And Keith. I just don't understand what's happening. That makes two of us, he said, glancing at my lips. But I'd like to find out. The closing announcement interrupted us. See you Monday, Jacob, Phil said, backing away. I exhaled shakily from the weight of what had just transpired. After 2 days, Monday arrived with a knot of anticipation in my stomach. The weekend had given me too much time to replay both encounters. Keith's body against mine on the basketball court, Phil's warmth enveloping me between library shelves. I had convinced myself I'd imagined everything. Reality proved me wrong within minutes. Morning, Jacob. I nearly jumped at Keith's voice. He leaned against the locker next to mine, looking unfairly good in a dark blue Henley that intensified his eyes. Hi, I managed, fumbling with my combination. Need help with that? He grinned, moving closer. I've got it, I insisted, just as the lock clicked open. Keith didn't step back. Instead, he reached forward, straightening my collar. His fingers brushed my neck, lingering longer than necessary. There, he said softly. Perfect. The bell saved me from responding. Keith winked before leaving me breathless. The pattern continued throughout the day. In chemistry, Phil claimed the seat beside me, empty all semester, and spent the hour with his knee pressed against mine. By Wednesday, rumors circulated. The school's hottest jocks suddenly paying attention to the transfer nerd? People noticed, whispered, stared. That afternoon, I ducked into the empty music room, seeking solitude. I'd barely settled at the piano when Phil entered. Hiding from us? He asked teasingly. The door opened again and Keith walked in, something flashing in his eyes. Hurt, quickly masked. I felt caught between approaching storms. I can't today, I said, gathering my things. I'm meeting a friend. I needed Mark, the only person who might help me make sense of whatever this was. After a week, the whispers started Monday morning. By Tuesday, they were impossible to ignore. There he is, someone hissed as I walked to my locker. The one who broke up Keith and Phil. I heard they're both trying to get with him, another voice replied, as if someone like that could land either of them. I kept my head down, pretending not to hear, but the comments followed me everywhere. Chen, a girl from my English class cornered me before lunch. Something with an M. Is it true Keith's son watched you to class yesterday? He was just being nice, I mumbled, trying to step around her. And Phil Matthews helped you in the library. She blocked my path. What's your angle? There's no angle, we're just friends. She scoffed. Those two don't make friends outside their circle, especially not with... Her eyes swept over my sweater vest dismissively. With what? Mark appeared beside me, his voice unusually sharp. With someone who actually has a brain? Is that what you were going to say, Madison? Madison, that was her name. She rolled her eyes and sauntered away with a warning about people talking. What was that about? Mark asked, concerned. Apparently my interactions with Westlake royalty are headline news. Are they bothering you? Mark asked protectively. They're actually being really nice. Something flickered across Mark's face. Hurt, maybe, before he masked it with a smile. That's good. You deserve friends like them. They're not replacing you, I said quickly. Mark's smile turned genuine. No one could, he said lightly, but there was a weight behind his words. A few hours later. Let me get this straight, Mark said, stirring his latte at the cafe across town. Both Keith's son and Phil Matthews are, what, fighting over you? I winced at his bluntness. Not fighting, just being attentive. Attentive, Mark repeated flatly. Jacob, these guys have never looked twice at anyone outside their social circle. Now they're both suddenly interested in you? That sounds crazy when you put it like that. It sounds like a setup, Mark countered. Are you sure they're not messing with you? The thought had crossed my mind, but I couldn't reconcile it with the genuine heat in Phil's eyes, the tenderness in Keith's touch. I don't think so, I said slowly. It feels real. Mark studied me. You like them both, don't you? I groaned, dropping my head into my hands. Is that even possible? To feel this way about two people at once? The heart wants what it wants, Mark shrugged. But two best friends? That's asking for trouble. As if summoned by a conversation, the cafe door opened, and my heart stuttered. Keith and Phil walked in, one after another. Mark stood, gathering his things. This is my cue to leave. Good luck, Romeo. Looks like you'll need it. Mind if we join you? Keith asked, his voice soft, but his eyes intense. We need to talk, Phil added. I gestured to the empty chairs, surrendering to whatever was about to unfold. After a while, the cafe conversation with Keith and Phil had been intense but inconclusive. Both admitted enjoying time with me, but neither explicitly declared their feelings. Over the next week, I found myself caught in their orbit, spending lunch with Phil one day, studying with Keith the next. Meanwhile, Mark grew increasingly distant, canceling weekend plans, responding to texts with one-word answers. Everything okay? I asked him after class on Friday, catching his arm. Fine, he said, avoiding my eyes. Just busy. Mark, come on. We've been friends since you transferred, yeah. He cut in. 3 whole months. Not exactly a lifetime. His bitterness shocked me. What's that supposed to mean? It means I was there when you had no one. Now that the popular guys are fighting over you, suddenly I'm an afterthought. That's not fair, I protested, but he was already walking away. I was still processing this when I rounded the corner to the parking lot and froze. Keith and Phil stood face to face, bodies rigid with tension. You're doing it again, Phil was saying. Just like sophomore year with the track captain. Their argument escalated quickly. When Phil suggested Keith couldn't stand seeing him have something special, Keith shoved Phil against a car. Phil recovered, landing a punch to Keith's jaw. Keith retaliated with a hit to Phil's ribs. Years of friendship dissolved into raw hurt. Stop it! I shouted, pushing between them. They separated, breathing hard, blood trickling from Keith's split lip. I won't be the reason you destroy your friendship, I insisted, backing away. Figure this out between yourselves. Leave me out of it. 3 weeks later. More than 3 weeks had passed since that first day when I had mistaken Keith and Phil's banter for a fight. 3 weeks of increasingly obvious attention from both of them, of lingering touches and meaningful glances. 3 weeks of growing whispers in the hallways, of both admiration and resentment from our classmates. 3 weeks of Mark becoming quieter, our movie nights less frequent, his texts shorter. It was late October now, midterms looming. What had started as confusing encounters had evolved into something more deliberate, with both Keith and Phil openly seeking me out. Yesterday, Keith had walked me to every class, carrying my books despite my protests. Today, Phil had appeared at my locker with coffee, brewed exactly how I liked it. 1 sugar, splash of almond milk, though I couldn't remember telling him my preference. Earth to Jacob. Mark waved his hand in front of my face during study hall. Sorry, I said. Just thinking. About your fan club? Mark's tone was light, but his expression seemed strange. They're not my fan club, I protested. Right. Keith and Phil are suddenly fighting over who gets to carry your books because they're deeply invested in your education. I flinched at his sarcasm. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Mark challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like they're competing over you like some trophy. And you're just letting them. That's not fair, I said, hurt. Mark sighed. You're right, I'm sorry. It's just... He gathered his books. Never mind. I promised to help Miss Winters reshelf books. As he walked away, I wondered why his disappointment hurt more than anything else. After a few weeks, the hallways became a minefield of awkward encounters. Keith and Phil pretended the other didn't exist. Their inseparable duo now fractured into careful avoidance and icy silence. The entire school noticed. Whispers followed them both, theories spreading about what could have possibly broken up Westlake's legendary friendship. Only I knew the truth, and it weighed on me like lead. I watched from the periphery as Keith sat alone at lunch, mechanically eating while scrolling through his phone. Across the cafeteria, Phil had taken to sitting with the basketball team, laughing too loudly at jokes that didn't reach his eyes. The bruise beneath Phil's eye had faded to a sickly yellow. Keith's split lip had healed, but something in his expression remained broken. "This is my fault," I whispered, pushing my untouched sandwich away. That night, I stared at my ceiling, replaying every moment since that first day in the classroom. Two best friends who'd known each other since childhood, now acting like strangers because of me. The thought was unbearable. I sat up suddenly, grabbing my phone. It was time to fix what I'd broken. "Need to talk to you both. The old oak behind the science building. Tomorrow, 3:30. Please come." I sent the identical text to both of them, then collapsed back onto my pillow, heart racing. My phone buzzed twice in quick succession. "I'll be there." Phil. "Okay." Keith. I exhaled slowly. Step 1 complete. Now for the hard part, figuring out what to say, even if it meant stepping away from both of them for good. The next day, the afternoon sun filtered through the branches of the old oak as I arrived early, heart hammering against my ribs. I'd chosen this spot deliberately, secluded enough for privacy, but open enough that they couldn't easily resort to fists again. Phil arrived first, hands shoved deep in his pockets, the tension in his shoulders visible from yards away. "Thanks for coming," I said, straightening from where I'd been leaning against the trunk. "For you? Of course." His smile was genuine, but tinged with sadness. "Is he coming?" Before I could answer, Keith appeared, approaching from the opposite direction. The two locked eyes briefly before both looked away. "This isn't an ambush," I said quickly. "I just want to talk. Separately, if that's easier." Relief washed over both their faces. "You first," Keith said to Phil, already backing away. After he left, Phil exhaled heavily. "So, what's this about?" "Your friendship," I said simply. "It's too important to throw away." Phil's jaw tightened. "Some things can't be fixed, Jacob." "Why? Because you both like me, or is there something else?" His eyes snapped to mine, startled. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," I said carefully. "Just trying to understand." Phil's gaze drifted to where Keith had disappeared. "It's complicated. I've got time." After a few days, over the next week, I became their unofficial mediator, meeting with each separately. Tuesday afternoon found me in the art room with Keith, helping him with a photography project, a transparent excuse to talk. "Hold this reflector higher," he instructed, adjusting his camera. Through the lens, he studied me with an intensity that used to make me nervous. Now I recognized something else in his gaze, a searching quality, as if looking for answers to questions he couldn't voice. "Have you talked to Phil?" I asked casually. Keith's hands stilled. "No." 15 years is a long friendship to throw away. "He threw it away," Keith muttered, then sighed. "Sorry, that's not fair." "What happened between you two?" Really? Keith lowered his camera, conflict written across his face. It's always been complicated with Phil. Since we were kids, he was everything. My best friend, my other half. And now? Now I don't know what we are. Keith sat beside me, our shoulders touching. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? I nodded, sensing the weight of his confession before he spoke. Sophomore year, there was this guy, the captain of the track team. Phil started hanging out with him and I was jealous. Not because I wanted to be friends with him, but because I wanted Phil to myself. Keith's voice dropped to a whisper. I've spent years convincing myself it was just friendship, but when I saw you two in the music room, you felt it again. I finished softly. Keith nodded, eyes glistening, but Phil would never feel the same. He likes you. I filed this revelation away, saying nothing. After 2 days. Thursday evening, I helped Phil study for his calculus test in the library. Your friendship with Keith, I ventured during a break. It seems different from most friendships. Phil's pencil stopped mid-equation. What do you mean? Just an observation. You two were inseparable. Almost like what? His tone was defensive, but his eyes held vulnerability. Like you were more than friends, in some ways. Phil stared at his textbook for a long moment. Sometimes I wonder, he finally admitted, voice barely audible. There are moments when Keith looks at me, and I think maybe, but then I convince myself I'm imagining it. Have you ever asked him? Phil laughed without humor. And risk losing him completely? No way. So instead you both fell for me? I asked gently. Phil looked up, startled. I do like you, Jacob. That wasn't a lie. But it's complicated. He ran a hand through his hair. When I saw Keith with you on the court that day, something inside me snapped. I told myself I was jealous because he was moving in on you, but maybe you were jealous for a different reason, I suggested. Phil's silence was confirmation enough. I was hoping that they'd find their way back to each other. But as days passed, it became clear that one conversation wasn't enough. They were civil when forced to interact, but maintained their distance. I needed a new approach. Same night. That night, I called Mark. After a hesitant start, I told him everything. Keith's confession, Phil's admission, my growing certainty that they were in love with each other but too afraid to see it. So let me get this straight, Mark said. These two guys, who supposedly had crushes on you, actually have crushes on each other? I think so, I replied. And I think I need to help them figure it out. Why? Mark asked. They hurt you. They fought over you, then abandoned you. Why do you care if they get together? I considered this. Because I've seen how they look at each other when they think no one's watching. Because... I paused, realizing something. Because everyone deserves to be with the person they love. There was silence on the line, then a soft sigh. You're a better person than me, Jacob Chen. Will you help me? I asked. Another pause. What did you have in mind? Over the next hour, Operation Cupid took shape. It would require timing, luck, and a bit of manipulation. But if it worked, Keith and Phil might finally confront the feelings they've been dancing around for years. This is either going to be brilliant or blow up spectacularly, Mark warned. What I didn't say was how much it hurt to step aside, to acknowledge that the intensity I'd felt with both of them had been a catalyst for something that had nothing to do with me. Operation Cupid starts tomorrow, I said, with more confidence than I felt. Let's get those idiots together. After a few days. Are you sure about this? Mark whispered as we huddled behind the equipment shed, watching the basketball court. Trust me, I replied, checking my watch. Keith always shoots hoop at this time on Saturdays, and Phil should be arriving any minute for his tutoring session with me. Which doesn't exist. Exactly, I grinned. Phase 1 of Operation Cupid, the accidental encounter. Right on cue, Keith appeared, dribbling his basketball with practiced ease, lost in his own world. Now we wait for Phil, I murmured. Mark shifted uncomfortably. This feels manipulative. It's for their own good, I insisted. 5 minutes later, Phil rounded the corner, stopping short when he spotted Keith. After a visible internal struggle, he continued forward. Hey, we heard him call. Keith caught his ball mid-dribble, surprise evident on his face. Hey, an awkward silence followed. That's our cue, I whispered, sending the pre-written text to Phil. Sorry, can't make our study session. Family emergency. Rain check? We watched Phil check his phone, frown, then explain to Keith about our canceled plans. Keith spun the ball in his hands. Oh, he said. Want to play one-on-one? Phil finally offered. Like old times? A slow smile spread across Keith's face. Prepare to get destroyed, Matthews. Mark and I exchanged triumphant looks as they began to play, movements initially stiff, but gradually relaxing into their old rhythm. Phase 1, success, I whispered. Operation Cupid continued throughout the following weeks. Phase 3 was our most inspired plan. This is ridiculous, Mark complained as we hung mistletoe in the empty classroom doorway. It's not even December. It's for the winter formal planning committee, I explained innocently. As we rounded the corner, we heard Keith's voice. Is that mistletoe? Mark and I high-fived silently. Same day. Mark and I crouched around the corner from the classroom where we'd hung the mistletoe, straining to hear what was happening. I can't believe Jacob set us up. Phil's voice carried through the empty hallway. The mistletoe was a bit much, Keith agreed, laughter evident. A pause followed. We should probably talk about it, Phil said softly. About the mistletoe? About what happened when we saw the mistletoe. My heart raced. The silence that followed felt heavy with significance. You kissed me, Keith finally said. You kissed me back, Phil countered. Why did you do it? Keith asked, vulnerability evident. I told myself it was because of the mistletoe, Phil replied slowly. But that's not true. I've wanted to do that for years, Keith. A sharp intake of breath. Years? Since freshman year, maybe longer. I just never thought. I never seemed like I might feel the same way, Keith finished. Phil, why do you think I got so weird when you showed interest in someone? Why do you think I freaked out about Jacob? I thought you liked him. I thought I did too, Keith admitted. But it's always been you, Phil. I was just too scared to admit it. So what now? Phil asked hopefully. Now we stop pretending, Keith said firmly. We stopped using Jacob as an excuse. We pressed ourselves against the wall as footsteps approached. Peeking around the corner, we saw them walking away, fingers tentatively intertwining. Mark turned to me, eyes wide. Did that just happen? I nodded, feeling happy for them, yet experiencing a twinge of loss. Operation Cupid is a success, I whispered, forcing a smile. After 2 days. 2 days later, I was arranging books in my locker when a shadow fell across me. I turned to find Keith and Phil standing side by side, their shoulders touching in a way that seemed both casual and deliberate. We need to talk, Phil said, his tone serious, but his eyes twinkling. About what? I asked innocently. About the sudden coincidences happening with us, Phil continued. I closed my locker slowly. I can explain. No need, Keith interrupted, a smile breaking across his face. After the mistletoe incident, Phil added, his hand fighting Keith's and interlacing their fingers. We had a long talk. My heart swelled at the sight of their joined hands. And we realized we've been idiots, Keith said simply. Phil continued. We were so caught up in our feelings for you that we couldn't see what was right in front of us. So, Operation Cupid worked? I asked, unable to keep the smile from my voice. They both stared at me in surprise, then burst out laughing. You named your scheme? Phil asked incredulously. It was Mark's idea, I defended, though it absolutely wasn't. Keith's expression softened. Thank you, Jacob. Seriously. Without your meddling, helpful intervention, I corrected. We might have never figured this out. Phil nodded, his eyes sincere. You could have pursued either of us. Instead, you stepped back and helped us find each other. I shrugged, feeling both happy for them and a little wistful. That's what friends do. Later in the afternoon. So that's it? Mark asked as we walked home. They're together now? I nodded, still processing the sight of Keith and Phil with fingers intertwined, thanking me for bringing them together. Looks that way. And you're okay with that? Mark studied me carefully, searching for signs of heartbreak. I am, I said, surprised to find it true. They make sense together. Mark was quiet. I thought you'd be upset. You seemed pretty into them both. I was caught up in the attention, I admitted. Two popular guys suddenly noticing me? It was flattering. But watching them today, I realized they were never really seeing me completely. I was just the catalyst for something already there. Their loss, Mark said quietly. Anyone who doesn't see how amazing you are is an idiot. I glanced at him, surprised by his intensity. Thanks. After a moment, Mark spoke again. I should apologize. For what? For being a jerk lately. I was jealous, and instead of being supportive, I pulled away. Jealous? My heart suddenly raced. Mark kept his eyes down. Watching them fawn over you while I've been right here, seeing you exactly as you are. He shook his head. Forget it, it's stupid. It's not stupid, I said softly, understanding dawning. We should celebrate, he interrupted. Movie night at my place? I let him change the subject, sensing he wasn't ready. But as we walked, I studied his profile, wondering how I'd missed what now seemed obvious. His brightening eyes when he saw me, his protective tone, his constant presence. Movie night sounds perfect, I agreed, making a mental note to revisit this conversation later. After a few weeks, the glow from Mark's television cast soft shadows across the living room as we settled into his couch, shoulders nearly touching. Pass the popcorn? I said, reaching across the small space between us. Mark lifted a single piece, his eyes meeting mine. Open? He whispered. My heart fluttered as I parted my lips. His fingers brushed against them as he placed the popcorn in my mouth, the touch lingering longer than it should have. Electricity sparked between us. You've got... Mark's voice trailed off as he reached toward my face. His thumb swept across my lower lip, removing a trace of salt. Time seemed to slow as his hand cupped my cheek, his touch feather-light yet burning. Thanks, I breathed, unable to look away from his eyes. The movie faded to background noise as Mark's arm wrapped around me, drawing me against him. I melted into his warmth, my head finding the perfect spot against his shoulder. His heartbeat quickened beneath my palm. Is this okay? He murmured, his lips close to my hair. More than okay, I whispered back, feeling something bloom in my chest. When the credits rolled, neither of us moved. Mark turned to me, our faces inches apart. His gaze dropped to my lips, and for a breathless moment, I thought he might kiss me. Jacob, he started, then smiled softly, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. I'm really glad you're here. The unspoken words between us felt like a promise, waiting to be kept. After a few months, the school year was ending. Mark and I sat on the bleachers, watching Keith and Phil run plays together on the distant basketball court, their laughter carrying across the space. They look happy, I observed, smiling at how naturally they moved around each other now, their connection restored and transformed. Mark nodded, fidgeting with the wrapper of his granola bar. Jacob, there's something I need to tell you. Something in his voice made me turn to face him fully. What is it? Remember when I was being distant? During the whole Keith and Phil drama? His eyes remained fixed on his hands. It wasn't just because I felt replaced. Then why? Mark took a deep breath. I was jealous. I've had feelings for you since you transferred here, and watching those two compete for your attention was hard. Mark, I know you don't feel the same way, he rushed on, and that's okay. I just needed to be honest before graduation, and I leaned forward and kissed him, cutting off his nervous rambling. When I pulled back, his expression of shock made me laugh softly. It was never about Keith and Phil, I told him, taking his hand in mine. It was always you, Mark. I was just too distracted to see it. As understanding dawned in his eyes, I realized that sometimes the most perfect endings are the ones you never saw coming. The end. Who would you pick? A jock or a nerd? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.